A remote mountain lodge where doors open on their own and mysterious shapes lurk in the darkness. A historic cemetery whose bounds harbor the spirits of fallen Confederate soldiers. And a sprawling forest state park boasting monster sightings, ghosts, and legends as old as the land itself. Await on this journey through some more of the most haunted places in North Carolina. Let's dive right in. Hey everyone, and welcome back for another journey through some more of North Carolina's most haunted places. Recognized for its historic ties to the Civil War, for its Appalachian culture, music, and crafts, and for its beautiful nature expanses, the Tar Heel State also totes a surprising number of scary stories, urban legends, and Old Hill folklore sure to send shivers down your spine. Oh, and before we get rolling, if you enjoy my content, guys, I would highly appreciate if you subscribed, hit that like button, shared me with all of your friends, and for those of you who really want to show my channel some love, leaving me a super thanks greatly supports the videos that keep you shivering late into the night. Are you sure you're ready for this one? Our first haunt takes us to North Carolina's capital city of Raleigh and has us touring the historic Oakwood Cemetery. Oakwood Cemetery, which is located in Raleigh, North Carolina, is a weathered historic burying grounds holding some very prominent names from the even more prominent city's past. That's bounds are visited by countless tourists each year, and that acts as a catalyst for some of the region's most spine-tingling ghost stories. Historically, following the Civil War, the Wake County Ladies Memorial Association would arrange for the reinterment of Confederate dead from both city and informal burying grounds to a plot of land granted for the purpose of a cemetery by state legislator and Raleigh philanthropist Henry Mordecai. And by 1869, this plot would be formally established as Oakwood. And by the following year, as the need for more burial space arose, it would be expanded and modernized several times. Through the remainder of the 1800s, additional Confederate remains were removed from their original burial plots at places such as Gettysburg or Arlington, amongst others, and reinterred at Oakwood. And by the early 1900s, a handful of family and denominational sections were added to the expanse. In 1930, the yard's prominent House of Memory was constructed and was designed and decorated to honor and recognize the efforts of all North Carolinian servicemen to date, and moving forward, additional plaques would be added to the house to memorialize those who served through later eras. Through the mid-20th century, Oakwood would continue to act as an active burial grounds, and as such, it would acquire additional plots of land for the purpose of expansion, with its reach stretching far beyond the original soldiers' acreage to a much larger landscape of around 20,000 burials. And by 1974, the Oakwood neighborhood, which contains the cemetery as a contributing element, would be listed on the National Register of Historic Places, with the yard itself officiated as a historic landscape. Through the late 20th century, focus on preservation, record-keeping, and tours would increase, and Oakwood's nonprofit organization would develop burial record search tools, walking tours, and visitor materials, while stewardship and maintenance efforts were doubled. Through the turn of the century and up through 2020, interest in the old graveyard was only further bolstered, with visitor guides and websites expanded, alongside the implementation of a visitor center, walking tour maps, public hours, and improved searchable burial records. All the while, the cemetery would continue to host commemorative events and manage the Confederate Soldiers section, alongside the House of Memory. Perturbingly, this weathered old burying ground has long been shrouded in tales of the paranormal, and both visitors and staff members have reported the constant feeling of being watched by someone or something unseen, sightings of strange mists or shadowy figures, and orbs of light spied flitting above the headstones. What is easily the yard's most infamous story centers around the grave of one Etta Rebecca White Ratcliffe, who died in 1918 at the age of 37 from a cerebral hemorrhage, and its plot is adorned with a chilling statue of an angel whose face was molded after her own. As local legend has it, this statue has a habit of turning or moving its eyes to watch those walking past, and some claim that at midnight on Halloween, its head spins around 12 times. Notably, this angel's neckpiece actually bears a large crack, which some claim lends cadence to the age-old fables surrounding it. Lastly, some tell the restless spirits of Confederate soldiers roam the cemetery after dark, and alongside phantom sounds of battle including gunshots, shouting, and musket fire, several have told of watching groups of soldiers in gray marching around the premises that they at first believed to be a reenactment, until said soldiers vanish into nothingness. And on to number 2, which takes us to the western end of the state and has us skirting the shores of the legendary Lake Lure. Lake Lure, which is located in Rutherford County, North Carolina, is a popular man-made water expanse that accommodates thousands of visitors from across the country and beyond each year, that boasts a wide range of associated legends spanning back to Cherokee history, which painted Hickory Nut Gap as a gateway to the land of So Lung, or tobacco. Additionally, they believe this site was guarded by powerful spirits, and several told stories of little people that hid away in the forests. Historically, in 1902, the local Chimney Rock and 400 acres around it were purchased by one Dr. Lucius Morse and his brothers, Hiram and Assail, under the joint vision of the creation of a resort community. And over subsequent years, the trio would amass even more land, eventually totaling in at around 8,000 acres. In 1925, the Carolina Mountain Power Company, which was owned by the Morse family, was formed and would finance construction on the Broad Dam, which was complete by the following year, being 1926. And by 1927, Lake Lure was fully filled, boasting 720 acres and almost 27 miles of shoreline, which supported the founding of the town of Lake Lure simultaneously. In 1928, the hydroelectric power plant began operations and would sell power to the Blue Ridge Power Company. Unfortunately, however, by 1929, and in the shadow of the Great Depression, firm Stroud & Company of Philadelphia would foreclose upon the lake, dam, and all power organizations, and would take over and maintain ownership. In 1963, North Carolina legislature would authorize the town of Lake Lure to issue revenue bonds in order to acquire the lake, dam, and all associated Stroud real estate. And by July of 1965, acquisition of said properties was completed, and the town itself would officially become owner of the expanse. More recently, in 2024, heavy rains courtesy of Tropical Storm Helene would cause massive flooding through the region to the point where the lake actually overtopped the dam, and in turn, damages would be incurred by the structural supports and erosion of embankments, causing emergency evacuations downstream, and the destruction of the Flowering Bridge and Rainbow Bridge, the latter of which was a pet memorial. Today, the lake and its surroundings remain popular tourist destinations, offering a range of hiking trails, boating options, shops, campsites, and so much more. Two of the lake's most popular sites are, of course, Chimney Rock and Hickory Nut Gorge, which offers scenic beauty, sprawling beaches, and unparalleled recreational opportunities. As a side note for you Patrick Swayze fans out there, the 1987 classic Dirty Dancing shot a number of its scenes right around Lake Lure, and this tie to the silver screen continues to draw in traffic to this day. Now, for a relatively unknown haunt, ghost stories surrounding Lake Lure are definitely larger than life, and include reports of shadowy figures that stalk its trails, instances of personal electronics behaving erratically, or of compasses going awry, and encounters with cryptids that most describe as large, hulking shapes that stay hidden in the foliage. One of the strangest of Lake Lure's stories emerged through July of 1806, when several unrelated sources reported watching what they described as angelic beings dressed in white robes near Chimney Rock. These figures circled the rock while ascending it, and as they reached the top, one by one they began disappearing into thin air. According to eyewitnesses, the procession lasted for about an hour, and all present reported feeling pleased at the sight, but also suddenly weak of body. Only 5 years later, in 1811, 5 witnesses reported that what appeared to be a battle between 2 armies of cavalry was transpiring in the skies above Chimney Rock, with swords flashing, yelling, and the clatter of war raging every evening over several days. This sighting gained so much attention that a public meeting was actually held in Rutherfordton between witnesses while the town tried to decide how to respond. Another haunted hotspot in the area is none other than the Lodge on Lake Lure, which was created in 1937 as a memorial to George Penn, a highway patrolman who was shot and killed in the line of duty. Acting as a private lodge and only open to the public in as recently as 1990, some say the spirit of Penn lingers near room 4, where several have cited his manifestation pacing about briefly before disappearing through the closed and often locked door. Reports from other former staff members have described the ghost of Penn as somewhat mischievous and claim he's been responsible for stealing toilet paper out of room 2, for moving flower arrangements, and has even been known to throw glass goblets against the wall. Lastly, both staff and guests have captured the figure of a young boy in photographs taken around the lodge, most recent of which was taken by a staff member prepping for a wedding. This employee actually posted his photos online, and the boy's form wasn't noticed until several days later, when a viewer on social media spotted it. Number 3 takes us a short skip to the west of our last haunt, and has us checking in at the mysterious and supernaturally charged Balsam Mountain Inn. The Balsam Mountain Inn, which is located in Jackson County, North Carolina, is a historic 3-story wooden neoclassical and Victorian-style hotel that boasts the title of being one of the oldest remaining resorts in the North Carolina mountains, whose 2-story gallery-style 100-foot-long deck is graced by thousands of visitors each year, and its name has grown in infamy for its ties to a number of ghost stories and chilling local folklore. Historically, from 1905 to 1908, construction of this old lodging would be started under brothers-in-law Walter Christie and Joseph Kinney, and upon its completion, what was then known as the Balsam Mountain Springs Hotel would open with 100 guest rooms, communal bathrooms, and lodging fees of only $5 a day, which included meals. Now, this original name was quite fitting, as water within the establishment was provided by a series of 7 natural springs, allowing for visitors to fill up bottles with cold mineral water that was believed, and by some is still believed, to have healing properties. At its height in popularity, the old inn would act as a stop for no less than 4 passenger trains, and through the roaring 1920s, it would quickly grow into a premier destination for wealthy travelers from the south. But it wasn't all fun and games at the lodging, and with a rise in popularity came guests from all walks of life, even some less than savory ones. Amidst nation-sweeping crime waves of the 1920s, fights, duels, and criminal activities would permeate even this pristine retreat. And sadly, in 1928, a visitor was actually shot outside and ended up dying while being tended in a second-floor room. But more on that later. Unfortunately, through the rest of the 20s and into the 30s, the Great Depression would hit the travel industry pretty hard, resulting in the hotel being foreclosed upon and auctioned off right on the steps of the Jackson County Courthouse, after which it was purchased by Ephraim Stillwell, during whose tenure it would pick up the nickname the Grand Old Lady. Sadly, however, through the 1940s, it was decided the passenger line that led to the Balsam would cease, with its last passenger car departing the site on July 4th of 1948, and with guest numbers decreasing rapidly, the property would fall into a state of disrepair. More recently, in 1982, and in an effort to preserve the site, the Balsam Mountain Inn would be added to the National Register of Historic Places. However, just 6 years later, in 1988, it was forced to close its doors under the order of the health department. Even while closed, the hotel would remain in Stillwell family hands, and though at the time its fate was uncertain, as it lay abandoned, interest in its restoration and revitalization would grow. Finally, in 1990, one Marilee Teasley, who was an experienced innkeeper out of Tennessee, would purchase the property from the Stillwell family. Pouring her own money into the weathered old lodging, she would completely overhaul the property and would add heating, which the inn had never needed prior as it had never been open year-round. Additionally, she would cut the total guest room count in half and would use the additional space to create larger rooms with private bathroom facilities. By 1991, Teasley would open the first 2 floors up, and in 1995, a dining porch she'd fashioned would end up winning the Gertrude S. Caraway Award of Merit from the Preservation, North Carolina. A year later, in 1996, the hotel's 3rd floor was opened up. In 2017, the site was purchased by Marzena B. Wazinska, who would officially rename it as the Grand Old Lady, and in 2020, it was closed down once more. In the present, what is now the Balsam Mountain Inn has been reopened under Lorraine and Rodney Connard and offers a slew of amenities, including an on-site library, live storytelling, a mess of encompassing trails, pickleball courts, playgrounds, trivia, wine tasting, and much, much more. Over its many years, a number of urban legends have emerged from the Balsam, and most claim the expanse to be haunted by the spirits of both guests and staff members who passed on within, with many reporting phantom footsteps heard from empty hallways, knocking or the sense that someone unseen is standing just outside of one's room, and even encounters in which the sounds of disembodied whispers or names being called have woken lodgers from slumber in the middle of the night. One of the inn's most famous ghost stories revolves around the aforementioned 1928 shooting that transpired just outside, during which a young, handsome sheriff from town got into a dispute that resulted in him being mortally wounded, and later dying in room 205. Now, as it's told, in life, this sheriff was known for being a bit of a womanizer, and as such, his ghost appears most often to beautiful young women, some of which that have even reported feeling an unseen arm around them or soft pinches. Also reported by both staff and guests are instances of sheets being yanked from beds, ghostly giggling that drifts from around corners, and accounts of random objects moving around on their own. Lastly, in 2017, when Wyszynska set her sights on the property, former owners and staff members would actually warn her about the hotel's many hauntings, and Wyszynska, who wasn't a believer, would scoff these claims off as imagination and would go through with the purchase regardless. Her tune changed, however, after she'd stayed her first night there, when she reported strange scratching sounds from the empty room beside her, and like so many others, of having her bedsheets ripped from her body in the middle of the night. She was so perturbed by what she'd experienced, in fact, that she went on to contact a local priest and had him cleanse the property. This stopped the supernatural activity for a few weeks, before phenomena began occurring once again and at a much more frequent rate. Eventually, the stupefied owner hired a paranormal investigation team, and their investigation would yield orbs and photography, strange heat fluctuations, and hours of seeming communication with the dead, which included recordings with a range of voices and personalities. Strap on your hiking boots for number 4, which has us trekking the wilderness at the Grandfather Mountain State Park. Grandfather Mountain State Park, which is placed in Avery, Caldwell, and Watauga counties in North Carolina, and that averages 91,000 visitors a year, and even more during its hosting of the Grandfather Highland Games, which celebrate Scottish ancestry by way of games, music, and good food and drink, is also fairly infamous for its ghost stories, and is purportedly one of the most haunted places in the state. Historically, somewhere around 1.1 to 1.2 billion years ago, the old crystal rocks that compose this prestigious rise were formed somewhere below the Blue Ridge. Around 300 million years ago, a series of mountain building events would push up the Appalachian and Blue Ridge chain, and along with it, Grandfather Mountain. And over the past 100 million years, erosion has sculpted the sharp ridges, cliffs, and slopes that are visible today. Predating European settlement, Grandfather Mountain was frequented by tribes native to the region, namely by the Cherokee, and they would form a name for the mountain, being Tanawa, or Fabulous Hawk or Eagle. By the mid-1700s, early explorers such as Daniel Boone were traversing the region, and in 1794, French botanist and explorer André Michel would climb the peak in order to make a series of scientific observations. Through the early to mid-1800s, Grandfather Mountain would catch the eyes of many parties, including those interested in science, real estate, mining, and yes, of course, tourism. And through the 1880s, one Donald McRae of the Linville Improvement Company would begin purchasing large tracts of land around the mountain with the aim of profiting off of tourism. Around this same time, one Shepherd Duggar would open a hotel on the side of the mountain near the headwaters of the Linville and Watauga rivers, and would advertise by way of the site's clean air and water. And over the following years, the Boone Fork Lumber Company would begin large-scale timber operations near. Through the turn of the century, the mountain would boom in popularity, and in 1924, it would host its legendary Singing on the Mountain, which was a gospel, old-timey music gathering held right at the foot of the incline. More recently, in 1952, Hugh McRae Morton, grandson of the aforementioned Donald McRae, would inherit the mountain along with all of his grandfather's land, after which Morton would refurbish and widen all of its roadways, and later the same year would implement the iconic mile-high swinging bridge, which led across a chasm at about 5,280 feet in elevation, or roughly 1 mile up. In 1956, the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games were held for the first time and celebrated years of Scottish heritage that helped form the region. And in 1968, Morton would acquire 2 black bears, one male and one female, in an attempt to repopulate the mountainside. Unfortunately, the female named Mildred had trouble adapting to the wilderness after captivity, and she was recollected until an enclosure could be constructed. In 1973, Mildred's habitat would receive a large upgrade and expansion, and would introduce native species like elk, cougars, eagles, and otters. Through the remainder of the 70s, conservation efforts would increase dramatically, and Morton would dedicate his time to protecting the land, its natural vistas, scenic corridors, and would remove pollution. In 1989, 1,460 acres of Grandfather Mountain wilderness were set aside, and in 1992, the site was selected by UNESCO to be part of the International Biosphere Reserve Program. Sadly, Hugh Morton would pass on in June of 2006, after which ownership of the lands would fall under controversy. And after further refurbishment and corrected surveys in 2007, in 2008, an agreement between the state and the Morton family would reveal that undeveloped backcountry around the mountain would be used to form a state park. In 2009, the Grandfather Mountain Stewardship Foundation was formed, and the state would acquire almost 2,500 acres of backcountry that they would add to the state park system. Since this date, Grandfather Mountain continues to act as a premier tourist destination, operated jointly by the Stewardship Foundation and the state. It offers countless trails, campsites, and the like, and many are drawn in by its mile-high swinging bridge, scenic drives, wildlife habitats, and of course, by its cultural events, like the Highland Games and singing on the mountain. But Grandfather Mountain harbors a darker nature, one filled with ghost stories, cryptid sightings, and the otherwise weird and inexplicable. And over its utilization, hikers, campers, tourists, event attendees, and more have reported instances of trees moving unnaturally, shadowy figures sighted skulking through the brush, and encounters with a range of cryptids, including skunk ape, skinwalkers, dogmen, and wampus cat. One of the most famous Grandfather Mountain stories tells of its eerie phantom hiker, a grizzled man of about 50 years in age that sports a long beard, the attire of an early 20th century explorer, and carries a walking stick and a canvas army backpack. This odd apparition never actually acknowledges living hikers, and sightings of his form become much more common during stormy weather, especially around dusk. Also reported across the mountain's many trails are disembodied footsteps that rapidly approach hiking parties from behind, mysterious figures that skirt the tree line, and strange growls or screeches that don't seem human in nature. Another famous story surrounding Grandfather Mountain intertwines with actual history to tell of the May 12, 1978 crash of the Cessna 182Q Skylane N735MB, which claimed the life of its pilot, who was the only occupant, Philip Cress Dupree. The crash took place on the summit of Callaway Peak, the tallest peak within the park, a site which is reachable by way of the Nuwadi Trail, and it's now marked with a 100-foot-long bridge over Boone Fork Creek. To this day, many report the sound of Dupree's plane overhead, which is sometimes accompanied with actual sightings of the phantom craft, and the full-bodied apparition of a man matching the pilot's description has been seen wandering nearby trails, with a confused look upon his face. Saving the scariest for last, our fifth and final haunt has us traveling east to the North Carolinian coast and exploring the iconic Old Baldy. The Baldhead Island Lighthouse, or Old Baldy, which is located along the banks of the Cape Fear River in North Carolina, is a towering 110-foot former navigational aid that boasts the titles of being both the oldest still standing lighthouse in the state, as well as of being one of NC's most haunted locations. Historically, through the mid to late 1700s, and following a slew of deadly shipwrecks, the North Carolina colonial government would select a 10-acre site on the western end of Baldhead Island for the creation of the state's first lighthouse, though these plans would be put on hold for a time. And finally, in 1792, 3 years after North Carolina's statehood was granted, Congress would appropriate a sum of $4,000 for the construction of the long-awaited tower. Once construction was complete, this initial lighthouse would prove infinitely useful in both guiding vessels through the area, as well as for attracting passing ships to the nearby port of Wilmington, which actually has the old tower to thank for much of its success, as it probably wouldn't be as big of a city as it is today if not for the light. Sadly, in less than 2 decades, severe erosion of the riverbanks would threaten the old lighthouse, and in circa 1813 to 1816, funds were approved for the complete rebuilding of the structure, which would result, by 1817, in the finished construction of the old Baldy we know today. Notably, through the building process, bricks from the first tower were utilized in Old Baldy's construction, which took place further inland so that it wouldn't be threatened by shifting sands. The light would be lit later the same year by American Revolutionary War veteran and Sedgley Abbey plantation owner Sedgwick Springs, who would go on to act as lightkeeper for more than 3 decades. Sadly, in 1834 and again in 1836, one Captain Henry D. Hunter of the revenue cutter Taney would inspect the light and would find, as he put it, an old Revolutionary soldier who was too unable from sickness to give the lighthouse grounds his personal attention. He did add, however, that the light itself had seemingly been maintained dutifully and shone brightly, showing well from a distance. Keeper Springs, who was 80 years old at the time of the latter report, would pass on the following year, having never given up his post. By the early 1950s, however, several problems arose. It was noticed that the tower's height was inadequate in heavy fog or storms, just past Frying Pan Shoals, and a handful of wrecks would occur, resulting both in a lightship being placed on the shoals and in the setting of the Jones fog bell near the lighthouse itself. Despite these measures and efforts to improve the light up through 1855, in 1856, Old Baldy was discontinued following the construction of an entirely new lighthouse at the mouth of the Cape Fear River. For years, Old Baldy would lie dormant. However, following the Civil War, in 1880, the engineer department would close off the new inlet channel, rendering our newer light useless, and Old Baldy's light would be lit once more. While the public and interested political parties requested funds to increase the height while simultaneously upgrading Old Baldy, these requests were never approved. And in 1898, the Lighthouse Board would approve the construction of the Cape Fear Lighthouse on the southeastern end of the island, where it could more effectively mark the shoals. However, even following the construction of this more modern light, Old Baldy would continue to serve as a coastal beacon until 1935, and was used namely to guide ships into the mouth of the river safely. Following its decommission, the lighthouse would retain a radio beacon until 1958, and then it would sleep in abandonment once more. While Old Baldy no longer acted as a lighthouse, it would be approved to act as a daytime navigational aid and beacon, and as such was maintained over the years. In 1975, it would be honored on the National Register of Historic Places. And in the present, the Bald Head Island Light, though void of illumination, still stands as a beacon to the community and culture that worked so hard to preserve it. It is open to the public and offers a number of touring options, both guided and self-guided. Chillingly, the whole of Lighthouse grounds harbor a long list of ghost stories and tales of paranormal activity, and both officials and visitors have reported phantom footsteps heard up and down the stairs, instances of the base door opening and closing by itself, and disembodied voices or that light rustling or shuffling sound that tells you someone's near, heard from around corners and from spaces that are completely empty. Easily the most famous legend tied to Old Baldy and surrounding the landscape is that of Theodosia Burr, daughter of former U.S. Vice President Aaron Burr, who, for those not familiar, ended up killing a man in a duel, committing treason by way of attempting to form his own empire, and eventually went on to flee the country for a time, leaving his belongings and Theodosia behind. When Aaron finally returned to America in July of 1812, Theodosia, who was living in South Carolina with her husband at the time, planned to find her father in New York. However, tragedy struck in the form of the death of her 10-year-old son, and it wasn't until December that she was well enough to make the trip. Theodosia, along with a family friend, would book passage to New York on the schooner Patriot. However, sadly, the Patriot would never arrive at its destination. Now, it's anyone's best guess what happened to that ship, but after search efforts turned up nothing, the government would document all on board as lost at sea. Some tell the vessel was claimed by the weather, or maybe by the shoals, and some darker theories would highlight the fact that pirates would actually walk a donkey with a lantern back and forth along the beach through the area to emulate the glow of a floating vessel, which would lure ships onto the sandbars so that they could rob them and kill everyone on board. Whatever the case, Theodosia's ghost has been sighted along the coastline surrounding the lighthouse, appearing as a beautiful woman in a blue dress. Many locals have reported sighting her and thinking her just another beachgoer, until they get closer and notice that her dress seems to be from another era, as well as the fact that she leaves no footprints in the sand. Also reported around Old Baldy are phantom wafts of tobacco smoke, instances of objects found rearranged on their own, and strange cold spots that many claim are related to the spirit of the former Keeper Springs. And several have told of ghost ships sighted in the nearby waters, including the likeness of our lost patriot, as well as some other vessels that seem pirate in nature, which those who have sighted have reported as silent, as not disturbing the waters, and as causing an intense feeling of fear, along with the sensation that dozens of eyes on board are watching. Thanks for joining me on this exploration through some more of the most haunted places in North Carolina. If you enjoyed hearing my histories and ghost stories, subscribe to my channel, throw this upload a like, and share me with anyone you think could use a good scare. I'll catch you all next time, and stay spooky.